Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored Never Boring. Recently I was contacted by a supremely talented artist, Ian Schofield. He was gearing up for a Kickstarter to sell high-resolution PDFs of a series of dungeon maps he's created, perfect for any tabletop role-playing game such as Dungeons & Dragons, but also useful for anybody who likes to create homebrew scenarios for a certain board game from Avalon Hill you may have seen me mention on the channel once or twice. Once I saw the quality of Ian's artwork, I had to see one of these mats in real life and let you all know about the forthcoming Kickstarter. The campaign, simply called Beautiful Dungeon Mats, should be live in the next few weeks, and there's a link in the video description below so you can head over to the Notify Me page to register your interest. So, here we have a lovely neoprene mat printed with one of Ian's dungeon layouts. This is called the Classic, and I think a lot of my viewers can probably guess why. The layout is very reminiscent of another dungeon I have spent many years exploring. I am of course referring to the classic HeroQuest board game layout. This mat has some similarities with the arrangement of the room blocks in each of the four corners, but it also has some interesting modifications, which I'll get to in a moment. First things first, I just want to clarify that the Beautiful Dungeon Mats campaign is offering 3ft×3ft 300 DPI PDF artwork. If you back the campaign, you will only be receiving art assets, and it's up to you how you get that artwork onto your tabletop. For that reason, I'm only going to be reviewing the art and the layout of this dungeon, and not the quality of the neoprene mat itself. Although for reference, the example I have here was printed up by Patriot Games in the UK, and they've done a very nice job. A custom neoprene mat like this is probably going to cost around £40 to £50, but you could also get the maps printed out on card, paper or cloth. Anyway, just look at this fantastic artwork. The campaign isn't called Beautiful Dungeon Mats for nothing. This art is so vibrant. Every room is colourful, and while it's detailed, it's not detailed to the point where it becomes too fussy and starts to be confusing on the eyes. You can clearly see the layout of each location, and although there are cracks in the tiles and the occasional bone or blood splatter, the art is clean enough to function as an attractive backdrop to your adventure without ever becoming too intrusive. That also means this particular dungeon is quite generic, and I mean that in a good way. You can use it to represent a fortress, a castle, the maze of a mad wizard, a sewer, an underground vault, or even the twisting, gloomy alleyways winding between the houses of an abandoned town. There isn't really any art that dictates the setting, other than in the large central chamber, which has a face motif that serves as an interesting centerpiece for the whole design. The squares are 1 inch, which means they will comfortably house any miniatures you play with that are on 25mm bases, and something I really like are the thick walls. They are actually 1 inch thick, with a bold black central region that helps them to stand out and keeps everything clear and easy to see. And because the walls are 1 inch thick, you can place doors on them without those doors making it difficult to place miniatures in the adjacent spaces. And should you happen to be playing a game that uses 1 inch tokens to reflect something like, oh I don't know, a secret doorway for example, you can place the doorway token directly on the wall, keeping both adjacent spaces free. Gotta say, I do really like that a lot. Comparing the overall layout to the official HeroQuest board, there are some significant differences. There is an extended central section with a larger chamber in the middle, and 3 additional blocks of rooms for the Dungeon Master to hide even more traps and treasures. Another thing to notice about this layout is there are lots of double wide corridors. Single width corridors create tension, as heroes wiggle through tight spaces and end up in situations where they are cut off from their allies. But those corridors can also cause games to drag out, or turn into drawn out slugfests between 2 immovable forces. By contrast, wider corridors allow heroes to fight 2 abreast, or manoeuvre around opponents so there are less bottlenecks to slow down the pace of the adventure. While I approve of the wider corridors, it is nice to see that there are still some narrow corridors as well for those moments of high risk tension, when the walls close in on our heroes and each step could lead to disaster. But even with those corridors, Ian has done something quite ingenious. You will see that several narrow corridors have alcoves and side tunnels, or will transition into wider corridors. That variation in the tunnel layout leads to variation in tactics. The alcoves in particular I think are very clever. It's a little area where the heroes can regroup, or set up a defensive position where they can benefit from making diagonal attacks while the approaching foes are forced into fighting in single file. Perfect for a last stand against insurmountable odds. The double width corridors also run all around the edge of the map, allowing lots of freedom of movement. But for me, that design choice is my only real complaint about this map, and it's a pretty minor complaint at that, based more on personal preferences than anything else. I would have really liked the map to be edged with a wall to make it feel complete and enclosed. A surrounding wall would also have prevented the situation we see on the mat here, where the tiled pattern of the corridor continues off the edge. As I understand it, the incomplete spaces are part of the bleed art, necessary to allow for tolerances in the way the neoprene is cut to ensure you don't get ugly unfinished edges with no print on them. That being the case, the width of the incomplete spaces may vary from mat to mat, and I suspect for many people it's not really an issue. Of course, if you have several of these mats, you could push a couple together to make a huge dungeon. I would be inclined to leave a small gap between them to represent a wall and then connect them with doorways. But the fact I am thinking about ways to connect multiple mats speaks volumes really, because just looking at this artwork fires my imagination. This is a map I can see myself using often for Dungeons and Dragons. I'm already thinking up scenarios in gloomy towns haunted with dark secrets, and heavily fortified castles where the heroes must use the alcoves and winding corridors to sneakily achieve their goals. These two rooms instantly stood out as prison cells. I can find plenty of good reasons to stick some heroes in those. And D&D is just the beginning. This is going to be a wonderful tool for homebrewing adventures for HeroQuest or any other tabletop dungeon crawler for that matter. But if this classic map design isn't doing it for you, fear not. Ian has come up with an exciting range of dungeon designs for his campaign. There's the Icy Terror, which has basically the same layout as the classic, except two of the central blocks of rooms are replaced with terrifying yawning chasms for unwary travellers to slide into. Then there's Barax's Chambers and Thalia's Lair, which are very similar in style but are completely different layouts. The rooms are much more scattered and broken up compared to the neat blocks of the classic, so you have more winding corridors, dangerous corners and dead ends to deal with. Next is the Halls of Oro, which has a more curved and flowing design. The rounded corners and circular chambers have a very pleasing look to them and remind me very much of old Dungeons and Dragons maps. It's also worth noting that some of the rooms have openings or connect to adjacent locations rather than being completely enclosed by walls, creating a much more open environment. I think it would make a perfect goblin hideout or orc-infested fortress. Resor's Maze is next, and it's very similar to the Halls of Oro, except it's almost entirely composed of corridors. There are lovely curving walls that give the maze an attractive flow, and as with all the maps there is plenty of wonderful details. I wouldn't mind being lost here for a few gaming sessions. Then we have Yolo's Crypt, a very densely packed map comprising small chambers and short corridors that create a confined claustrophobic environment. Of particular note here are diamond-shaped rooms and diagonal corridors, combined with more curving walls and tiny alcoves, which gives the whole map a completely different feel. Lastly, we have something which I think is very useful, the vanilla dungeons. Two different 3-foot by 3-foot gridded playmats with attractive tile artwork but no walls or other defining features. These are going to be perfect for when you want to create an environment with other terrain and map tiles you already have, serving as an attractive but unobtrusive background grid to mark out the region. The light sandstone style one is really rather lovely. And that's it for the designs. They are available in a variety of pledge bundles. There's the Vanilla Dungeons bundle comprising the 2 blank mats, the Roll to Move bundle which contains the 4 mats most suitable for games like HeroQuest, that's the Classic, the Icy Terror, Barax's Chambers and Thalia's Lair. There's the Lost Treasure bundle comprising the 3 mats that I think are more suited to role-playing games such as D&D and Pathfinder, that's Halls of Oro, Resor's Maze and Yolo's Crypt. Finally, there is the Explorer's Backpack pledge, which comprises all 9 maps, enough dungeons to keep even the most ardent adventurers occupied. As I mentioned earlier, I've put a link in the video description below. Follow that and you can register to be notified when the Kickstarter campaign goes live. Thank you to Ian for sponsoring this video and sending me one of his beautiful dungeon mats, and thank you for watching. Happy adventuring. If you liked the video, please consider pressing the like button. If you really like the video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so, and hopefully I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone, bye bye.